going to get into a topic that we have been discussing for weeks on end now, and that is the challenge that those of us in the media have speaking to government officials. I think it started during COVID, where we've all had a challenge of being able to get one-on-one sit-downs, almost kind of confrontational interviews with government officials that we need to hold to account. Jonathan's running to an issue right now in Washington.
Yeah, it just happened to me yesterday. I was at a press conference with the governor of Washington State, Governor Inslee, the King County Executive Dow Constantine, State Senator Manka Dhingra was, supposed to speak, and so on and so forth about a behavioral health care center that was opening. I RSVP'd to the event, however, and I got approved. I arrived to the event, and then another media handler from the city of Kirkland comes to me and says, I needed to go because I wasn't an invited guest, that I didn't have credentials. Of course, I showed my credentials multiple times. And, I can only imagine, where this was coming from because, again, I got approval, RSVP to this event, and I show up and they want me to go. And the common denominator is Dow Constantine and Governor Inslee. They've both banned me from their press conferences in the past. And I think they were caught off guard to see me there, and they simply asked the local officials to get me out of there. But thankfully, Kirkland officials came to their senses and, I stayed. But I'm dealing with this all the time now.
I think it's really common. I mean, last year I had a chance to try to interview Mayor London Breed in San Francisco, and I was 4 feet from her. We were masked up. She was masked. We were outdoors. And then she said to me, COVID protocol, I can't do the interview. And she got whisked away. And this is commonplace increasingly, unless a politician thinks you're an ally, right? And this is true of every scenario, federal level, county level, state level, local level. They basically want to talk to folks on their side. And this is a huge issue that we're not just seeing here domestically. I just saw this clip that a young lady who works at CNN in China put up. And Selena Wang put this up. It's a very short clip, but basically the Chinese political leaders are walking away from any kind of confrontation, any kind of interview. We saw this in Sacramento a few weeks ago, where Rob Bonta, who is in charge of the Justice Department here in the state of California, he's the Attorney General. His wife Mia was initially given authority to look after his budget, the DOJ budget in California. She got confronted by a journalist in Sacramento. It took her a few days. Then she read a statement, and finally they pulled her from overseeing that budget. But increasingly, unless you're like in their face, they have no interest in actually talking to us.
Yeah, it's really about controlling the narrative. I mean, that's the bottom line. And at the end of the day, when reporters can't get in questions or certain reporters get iced out because these reporters won't parrot certain talking points, then ultimately this hurts democracy, right? The folks, the citizens out there, they don't have access to information. They don't have access to different perspectives and worldviews. And you're not going to be able to make all the decisions. And it leads to bad policy in many cases. And we're seeing that a lot in Washington State. And I've been here in the Seattle area now for 3+ years. And I've started to ask, how do these laws, come to fruition? And now I'm starting to see that you have a passive base of voters and at the same time residents. You also have a media that's not robust and holding public officials accountable. And right now you have PR teams for these politicians who are outgunning journalists. And that's what's happening right now. And I'm just one local independent journalist here in Seattle trying to make a difference. But I've made enough of a difference where I'm making noise and they don't want me there. So I'm a threat to them.
Yeah, it used to be like 10-1 PR people versus journalists. I think it's probably like 20 to 25-1 now. It's
I was at the
incredible.
press conference yesterday. There were no reporters from any of the local TV stations, one local radio reporter and one local print reporter, and the independent journalist, the senior fellow here. And that's a total of 3 reporters, and none of us got to ask any questions.
Now, you did get a one-on-one with Inslee. How did you get that done, though?
So that's really interesting. So I finally did catch up with the governor. His media handlers know that I'm trying to chase him all the time. Look, I have a policy. I'll never go and interrupt a politician if, they're having a meal with family. I rarely will ever knock on their door unless they're accused of murder or something like that, or malfeasance. But the governor, if he's out in the public, he's fair game. And my sources on the ground told me he was at a school talking to parents, frustrated parents, who are about to protest a homeless encampment that's just spiraling out of control right across the street from the John Stanford International School in Seattle's Wallingford neighborhood. So that was my time to confront him. And, to the governor's credit, he graciously answered a couple questions. But when I started pressing him on some harder ones, he walked away and took off in his SUV. So that's just kind of part of the course for, working with the politicians and elected officials in the state. It's like this game of cat and mouse. And like you said earlier, if you're on their side, or at least perceived to be on their side, they'll talk to you, they'll invite you in. But if again, depends, of course, on the political leader. And it's not everyone. Let me be very clear. I mean, I've definitely had access in the past year to a lot of other local officials in Washington State who've been extremely welcoming and have answered my tough questions, and have welcomed that as well and thanked me for at least shining a light, at least covering the community. So it really depends, but that's what it's come down to now. It's going to be a handful of reporters really chasing the big story.
It's true. And it's not just one party, it's both parties doing this. It's across the board. And I will say this: the best politicians that I've encountered, the ones who've had the most success, are the ones who are actually willing to level with you and talk to you either on deep background, off the record, or in front of a camera. I know I had this conversation with Governor Jerry Brown years ago. Gave me 30 minutes, no issue, no handlers, straight shooter. And that's why he was so successful politically.
Yeah, and in this
Let's
day and age of cell phones and video, I mean, it's the optics. It just looks horrible. The PR handlers need to, go back to, PR 101 and be reminded that, hey, if you're saying no comment or just walking away, it makes your, candidate look horrible.